Moves and hugs, the latest loosening of lockdown for England. Meeting family and friends and eating out indoors. It seems normality really is getting nearer.
And today, we're taking a step towards that moment when we learn to live responsibly with COVID, when we cease eventually to rely on detailed government edicts and make our own decisions.
Well, the Prime Minister is still urging caution as we start to socialise again. He says the fight against COVID continues. Also tonight, yet another challenge looms for Labour, newly reshuffled and facing another by-election within weeks. Time's running out to save the Thames whale, wounded, stranded and thousands of miles from home. And
women's 100 yards won by Anita Neil.
The history maker, history forgot how an Olympic pioneer is being honoured at last.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has welcomed what he called a considerable step back to normality for England next week. From Monday, customers will be able to eat and drink inside pubs and restaurants. Indoor gym classes are allowed and we can even have a hug. Boris Johnson says he is confident that restrictions could be lifted even further next month. But as ever, there was a reminder not to throw caution to the wind. He said we must all learn to live responsibly with the virus. Here's our political correspondent Romilly Weeks on the next big step forward.
We've had to get used to extreme conditions for our socialising, and the next stage of the roadmap that means we'll be allowed back inside looking out at our wild and windy weather can't come soon enough for most of us. Today, with infections at the lowest level since September, the Prime Minister announced the next significant move back to normality, not just back to the pub, but back to hugs, with caution.
Today, we're taking a step towards that moment when we learn to live responsibly with COVID, when we cease eventually to rely on detailed government edicts and make our own decisions. So from next Monday, we're updating the guidance on close contact between friends and family, setting out the risks for everyone to make their own choices.
From next Monday in England, as well as giving people the choice of whether to hug close friends and family again, groups of 6 or 2 households will be allowed to meet indoors and be able to stay overnight. It will be legal for up to 30 people to meet outside. You'll also be able to eat and drink inside pubs and restaurants, while places like hotels, cinemas and children's soft plays will reopen. Up to 30 people will be able to attend weddings, with more at funerals, and secondary school pupils will no longer have to wear masks.
Prime Minister, now you're telling people to use their own judgment on hugging. Given that it is a significant factor in the spread of COVID, are you expecting people to be extremely cautious about who and how often they hug? If I can also ask who you're looking forward to hugging.
I think, and whoever I hug, I can assure you it will be done with caution and restraint. I'm not going to act it out now, but I think we all know what we mean. It's about basic common sense.
Next Wednesday.
Little Phoebe Hills, who was born in lockdown, has only ever met some of her close family online.
I can't wait for them to play together.
I know, it's so nice.
Next week, she'll play with her cousin inside for the first time, and there will be hugs.
And I think it's good that they're kind of letting people decide, because some people I don't think will want to, and that's absolutely fine. But I think that there are people that are desperate to have that hug again.
The Prime Minister also said we're on track to lift all legal restrictions from June the 21st, a big step in Phoebe's and all our lives. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
And our science editor Tom Clark is here. Big announcement today with a big side order of caution as well. How confident are scientists that we can do this properly and safely?
I think for the first time we're seeing a lot more confidence. This is a big step, but it's one they're taking with, I think, a lot more confidence. Looking at the modelling data on the numbers of infections that have been published today, you can really see strong signals that we are going to see still infections, there will still be deaths because of COVID in the coming months, but they are way, way lower in terms of numbers than earlier predictions. And this is largely down to how well vaccines have been rolled out, but also how well they're working, not just to protect us as individuals, but we now know they protect you from spreading the virus. And that's had a really significant impact on their projections. There are still some big caveats. You're absolutely right. We don't really know how this virus behaves once unlocking's taken place. And we don't really know, how the new variants might come on stream. And you can expect some of that scientific uncertainty around things like hugging, as you heard. I think if you're looking to a scientist for a clear answer on that, they're not going to be able to give you one. It really does come down to what you understand about the situation you're in. Has that person been vaccinated? Has that vaccine taken effect? How vulnerable are they? And those are things that we are, as individuals, going to have to factor in. Maybe do that hugging outside for the time being, just to really reduce the risk.
All right, Tom Clark, thank you. And the House of Commons sleaze watchdog is looking into whether or not Boris Johnson's luxury holiday in the Caribbean was properly declared. The investigation into the trip by the Prime Minister and his fiancée, Carrie Symonds, in December 2019 was confirmed by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the first time today. The £15,000 break was recorded as a benefit in kind from the car phone warehouse founder David Ross, who has a villa on the island of Mustique. Downing Street insists the holiday was transparently declared. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says his party must concentrate on winning votes after poor results in elections in England. His front bench reshuffle over the weekend sparked yet more internal fighting. And there's another big test coming up in just a few weeks' time with another by-election in a marginal seat. Our political reporter, Shihab Khan, is in Westminster. Shihab, has Mr Starmer, do you think, Sir Keir Starmer, healed wounds, or has he just served to reopen them?
Yeah, well, there are plenty within his party who are not particularly happy with the way in which this reshuffle has been managed. Now, we first heard about it in response to what was a fairly poor set of election results for the party, when reports emerged that the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, was going to have some of her key roles taken off her. At that point, we were expecting it to be a rather significant reshuffle, but in truth, it's been fairly small considering what we thought was going to come. Angela Rayner will no longer be the party chair. She will now be shadowing Michael Gove. Annalise Dodds will be replacing her as party chair. She's been demoted from Shadow Chancellor, and Rachel Reeves will now be promoted to do that role. Now, there are suggestions that the reshuffle had to be scaled back because of the reports and the reaction to Angela Rayner being demoted, and there are some within the party who are questioning whether it was a successful reshuffle and whether now was the right time to do it.
I suspect that the people around Keir wanted a much bigger reshuffle, but they just couldn't get it through. Just the general focus on individuals isn't right. People need to know what we stand for, so we need to talk about policy.
Now, I understand there will be more of a shift in the talk of the policy by the party. They'll be focusing more on jobs and what they can do on that. And you're right, Mary, there will now be a test for the party as they face a by-election in Batley and Spen. The Labour MP there will be stepping down because she's been elected as the mayor, the Metro Mayor of West Yorkshire. It's a marginal seat, and the Labour Party will be desperate to keep a hold of it.
OK, Shihab Khan in Westminster, thank you. Israeli police have fired tear gas, stun grenades and rubber bullets near the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of Islam's most holy sites. Hundreds of Palestinians have been injured, and tensions were raised even further tonight with an exchange of rockets between Gaza and Israel. And a warning, this report from our senior international correspondent John Irvine in Jerusalem has some upsetting images.
This evening, the wail of an air raid siren persuaded Jewish worshippers at the Western Wall to flee and run for cover. And this is why: a salvo of rockets fired by Hamas from Gaza towards the Jerusalem area. After the siren came the sound of impacts. Soon, the Hamas rocket fire was met with a retaliatory Israeli airstrike on Gaza, where local media reports the deaths of 3 children. The exchange follows the worst violence in Jerusalem for years. Some protesters even used the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself as a base from which to throw stones at the Israeli police, who responded with stun grenades. This is the third holiest site in Islam. Just outside the Old City, Palestinian stone throwers attacked a car driven by an Israeli man. The vehicle left the road ramming a protester. His condition and that of the driver are unknown. One of the most worrying aspects about all of this is a leadership vacuum right now. The Israeli government is in disarray and the Palestinian Authority looks extremely weak. There's a danger that extremists on both sides will see all this as an opportunity. The catalyst for the trouble is the threatened eviction of Arab families from East Jerusalem homes they moved into as refugees in the 50s. Israeli settlers have successfully used a law that allows Jews to reclaim property that was Jewish-owned before then. 70-year-old Aref Hamad has lived in one of the houses since the age of 5 and fears he's soon to be ethnically cleansed.
Government want this land for the Jewish only. That means they didn't want anyone from the Arab people, if they Muslim or Christian also.
During the clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque this morning, Israeli police tried to lock protesters inside the building, literally an attempt at containment. Now events here are anything but contained, with the extremists of Hamas trying to exploit popular Palestinian anger by launching indiscriminate rocket fire on Israel. John Irvine, ITV News, Jerusalem.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the rescuers doing all they can to save the young whale swimming the wrong way up the Thames. Now, the Queen shares a childhood memory in her first public appearance since the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. Those stories and more after the break. And welcome back. As the UK prepares to lift COVID restrictions and looks to brighter days ahead, India is sinking yet further into crisis. Official deaths there are surging towards 250,000 people, and daily COVID cases top 400,000. ITV News has filmed in an intensive care unit in Delhi where doctors are struggling to cope. Like everyone else, they are having to adapt to challenging and desperate conditions. From Delhi, Juliet Bremner sends this report.
An ancient ritual performed by a 13-year-old schoolboy. Today, Rudra Santalia prepared to light the pyre under his father's body. With the family's permission, we watched as 47-year-old journalist Uma Shankar was cremated. Rudra standing alone in an oversized protective suit, undertaking the duties of the eldest son.
It was very unexpected. It has shattered me and I think my brother's family. Nothing could be worse than this, I think, at this pandemic.
This was a personal tragedy, a tiny part of India's national disaster as the death toll keeps climbing. COVID has this country in a stranglehold. A hospital on the outskirts of Delhi is one of the few still accepting patients. Mohan Naskar has been brought by his daughter after a frantic search.
I had to go from hospital to hospital in search of beds, but I didn't get over there. Then at last someone suggested me of this hospital and I came over here.
Doctors inside fight to stabilise the 64-year-old. His oxygen levels are now dangerously low. He couldn't be admitted to intensive care as we were shown. All 20 beds were full. Doctors say they're now seeing more critically ill patients, which may explain the higher death rate. India's crisis is now unfolding here in the intensive care units. There are more patients than there are beds or ventilators. In contrast, at the hospital doors, admissions are controlled, the chaotic queues gone. Partly eased by community initiatives like a fleet of rickshaws fitted with oxygen tanks. They're sent to pick up patients with milder COVID symptoms to ease the pressure on ambulances. Although these patients are struggling to breathe, they're categorised as mild. They're being treated by trainee doctors who volunteered to work in a converted conference centre. This is a city slowly learning to navigate its way through the ravages of the world's worst COVID crisis, with limited success. Juliet Bremner, ITV News, Delhi.
Here, talks are continuing between the government and UEFA over whether or not to move the Champions League final to Wembley. The match between Chelsea and Manchester City was due to take place in Istanbul on May the 29th, but Turkey has now been placed on the UK's red travel list. UEFA wants assurances that officials and VIPs would be exempt from any quarantine requirements before agreeing to the change of venue. Now, the RNLI says a young minke whale, which was rescued in the River Thames, is still very distressed. The mammal first became stranded at Richmond Lock and Weir, and it was freed in the early hours of this morning. But this morning, the whale was spotted further upstream near Teddington Lock. Garrett Vincent has the latest.
At the edge of the River Thames this afternoon, a young minke whale, still breathing and still moving around, but the muddy waters of southwest London are a long way from where it should be.
Oh my God, it's an orca.
The whale was first discovered last night, trapped in the rollers which are used for launching boats a couple of miles downstream. A rescue operation was launched and it went on for hours into the night. After a struggle, they managed to get the whale off the concrete and onto an inflatable cradle to head out to deeper waters. But a short time later, it broke free, and the rescuers said it showed some signs of being injured.
For this individual whale, this is very serious. Unfortunately, it's a very young whale, so whether or not it's still maternally dependent, we don't know. But it's already looking fairly compromised. It's quite skinny.
At about 11 o'clock, it swam past here and it went to the lifeboat station. And then
RNLI teams were keeping an eye on the whale's progress up and down the river, and it could be spotted surfacing close to one of the locks. As crowds gathered, it found its way into the weeds at the river bank.
The whale's stuck just under where I'm standing here on this jetty. You can see him in what can't be more than 6 foot of water.
The whale did come up for air again, and a few moments later it moved further upstream. And another rescue attempt hasn't been ruled out, of an animal which is looking tired now of its adventure along the Thames. Garrett Vincent, ITV News.
Now, the Queen has spoken publicly for the first time since the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. During a video call with the Royal Life Saving Society, she recalled how, as a 14-year-old, she became the first person in the Commonwealth to receive a life-saving award for swimming.
I suppose I didn't really actually realise quite what I was doing, you know. But it was a great achievement, and I was very proud to wear the badge on the front of my swimming suit.
And finally tonight, recognition at last for Britain's first black female Olympian. Anita Neil competed in both the 100-metre sprint and relay at Mexico in 1968 and at Munich in 1972. Until recently, she felt she'd been ignored by the sport she loved. Now, at the age of 70, she has been named as a hero pioneer. She told Ben Chapman her inspiring story.
Britain's Olympic athletes warm up for Mexico.
She was a young sprinter who enjoyed being first. But what Anita Neil didn't know then...
10.6, can you believe it? I didn't know I could move that fast.
...was that no black woman had ever represented Britain at an Olympics before. An historic moment that's finally been recognised after 50 years.
It means that you do go down in history as being number one.
Which is always important to an athlete.
Absolutely. Competitiveness in me. Well, this is the top I wore in Mexico.
It was 1968 and Anita was just 18. Her speed was spotted at school and she qualified for the British team for Mexico City, where she would go on to witness another significant moment in black Olympic history.
It was so exciting. It was surreal. Most poignant was the black arm salute. They didn't have any trainers on. They wore black socks, which represented black poverty. And I myself didn't have a lot of money at all. I mean, we were really struggling as a family.
Did you identify with them?
Yes, in that respect.
Indeed, despite her medals, by her 20s she couldn't afford to continue competing, and her achievements were largely forgotten until recent research by the British Olympic Association identified her as a pioneer.
I want to inspire black girls to get in sport or anything, and I think that's a great thing to do. Inspiration.
But for Anita, it is recognition that now means as much as her medals of the trail she blazed for black women all those years ago. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Northamptonshire.
Inspirational Anita Neil. That's it. Tom's here at 10 from me and all the team. Bye-bye.